Chapter 22. Joe hammered on the TARDIS, on the blank dead walls. "You asked me to help you," she bawled. "You got me into this. You can't give up on me now. Let me in." None of it made much sense. The Doctor was 1,000,000 years away, by his own account. The TARDIS was just dead wood, fossilized into the rock. Behind her, Sam moaned. "She's dying," bawled Joe. "You've got to do something." The Doctor could see the daylight streaming in from the entrance to the dome. There was only one guard, and he was talking anxiously into a communications device of some sort. Good. Keeping low, the Doctor moved towards the guard. And stopped. Sam. Dying. No, thought the Doctor. This shouldn't happen. Couldn't happen. He couldn't allow it. He put all his energy, all his power, into feeding the telepathic link to the TARDIS. Magma moved, roared up from the throat of the volcano, flowed down the slopes, changed direction. Ash fell, rock solidified, the pattern changing to allow a different future. And the TARDIS came to life. The Doctor felt a cold circle of metal against the skin of his face. He opened his eyes, saw the Tractite guard standing over him. She was still speaking into the communications device. "He's here. Shall I bring him to you?" The Doctor couldn't hear Morvrill's response, but he didn't need to. He could hear her hoofbeats approaching down the long passageway. The light from the TARDIS dazzled Joe for a moment. Axeman jumped back with a violent hoot of dismay. Sam sat up, then fainted. Joe leaned over her, slapped her face gently. "We need you to operate the TARDIS," she said. Sam's eyelids twitched, but her eyes didn't open. Her breathing was fast, ragged. Joe looked up at Axeman, who was cowering in the entrance of the cave, afraid of the light. Fire, of course. He thought it was fire. "Nothing's on fire," she told him. "I need you to help me with Sam." The Haberline moved forward, a foot at a time, watching the light. He sniffed the air, felt it with his hands. At last, he bounded down and picked up Sam's feet. Joe lifted her shoulders, and together they bundled her through the door into the huge brassy light of the console room. Once they had lowered Sam onto the floor, Joe looked around, trying to get her bearings. It was hopeless. The TARDIS had completely changed. The time rotor was recognizable, but the rest was a jumble of dark rugs, brass surfaces, and an incongruous VW Beetle parked by the edge of a dark Persian carpet. There were brass gods, ranks and ranks of clocks, shelves of books disappearing upward into infinity. "I need medicine for Sam," she said aloud. The TARDIS didn't reply, but behind her a weak voice said, "Try under the harpsichord." Joe had to grin. Trust the Doctor to put something as important as the medical chest in such a stupid place. She couldn't even see there it was, almost drowned in a sea of 100 clocks. Beyond the time rotor, across a rug littered with a model train set, several sorts of gramophone, and a chair with a crown on it. She threaded her way across the floor, looked underneath the polished wood of the musical instrument. A phonograph, a ticker-tape machine, a green box with a red crescent on it. She dragged it out and opened it, getting her hands covered with white dust in the process. The box had clearly been in the wars. Inside were bandages, a hypodermic, some tablets, several bottles of tablets. She read the labels. Paracetamol, antibiotic, pre-resistant, antibiotic, post-resistant, antiviral, human chimpanzee. Well, here's hoping. She opened the last bottle, read the instructions, the entire label was handwritten, and shook a couple of the tablets into her palm. They were pale blue like tiny duck eggs. She crawled out from under the harpsichord, clutching the tablets. She was rather shocked to see Sam standing up, leaning on the console. She jumped over the train set, almost ran to the younger woman. She held out the tablets. "Take these." Sam looked round. "Never mind me," she said, Her teeth were chattering. "We need to move the TARDIS. Now!" She pressed a lever on the console, and the time rotor heaved. Once. Then it stopped. Sam hit the console. "No, you've got to go. You've got to get there." The time rotor remained ominously silent. Joe stared at it, looked frantically around the console for anything familiar. Switches, levers, buttons, puff chains. A calendar display currently showing Humanian era 2,569,878 BC. She thumped the nearest row of switches with her free hand. Nothing happened. And then the cloister bell began to ring. Somehow he had got away again. 1 minute he had been on the floor, inside the doorway, and the guard behind him. Then he had been underneath the guard's legs. Then he had gone. Morvril charged out through the door, screaming abuse at the useless soldier. The doctor was running up the hillside. She took aim. "No, Morvril, you don't—" She fired. A chunk of hillside vaporized, but the doctor had moved, was moving crabwise towards the big gun that guarded the settlement from possible Earth Empire interference. Morvril muttered an instruction into her communicator, saw the gunner draw his hand weapon and take aim at the approaching figure. "Only my personal timeline," Morvril fired again, and the doctor was rolling down the slope, away from the gun towards her. "Is holding all this together." Morvril took aim again. The blaster issued a faint beep. It was out of charge. The doctor scrambled to his feet. "You can't win, Morvril. It can't work. Your beautiful future simply isn't real. It isn't stable. It can't happen." Morvril took no notice. She clamped a new power pack on, then levelled the blaster. The doctor dived out of the way, but she'd worked out the answer to that trick now. She followed his movements for a moment until she was satisfied that she knew what his next dodge was going to be. Then she pulled the trigger. Axeman watched the two stranger women hitting the breaking stone. He knew it was a breaking stone, a thing to make stone tools with, just as he knew that this place around it, with its vastness and strange colours, was nonetheless a sort of nest. The place itself was telling him, even though he couldn't hear its voice. It was telling him not to be afraid, constantly telling him that. But he didn't need to be told. It was as if he had made a journey inside himself, had travelled beyond fear, beyond wonder. He looked at his hands. So many strange things, sounds, lights, deaths. But this, at least, was familiar. These women could not make the stones ring. He didn't know why, but it had always been the way. Only some people could make the stones ring, could break them in a way they must be broken to make tools. He advanced towards the toolmaker and raised the stone axe in his hands. The older woman turned to him, screamed, "No!" But Axeman knew what he was doing. He angled the axe against the light from the central column of the strange breaking stone, and then brought it down with all his might. The beam from the blaster became visible about halfway to the doctor. Then it spread out, shimmered, and Morvril cursed. Where had the alien managed to find an energy shield? But no. The air was thickening, becoming opaque. A wheezing, groaning sound filled Morvril's ears, confusing her. Then the blaster cut out, and an all-too-familiar blue box materialized in the air in front of her. Morvril felt her heart stop for a moment. The time machine hadn't been destroyed after all. The doctor had only been waiting for the appropriate moment to recall it. Everything had been a sham. And now the doctor was taking away everything she'd worked for, everything she'd lived for. "You can't do this to me!" she yelled. She realized that the Tractite who had been guarding the dome was standing by her side, staring at her. She looked over her shoulder, saw the gunner trotting down the slope. "Get back to the main gun," she yelled. "Cover that machine!" The soldier scurried back up towards the huge black shape of the gun. The human-made gun, thought Morvril with a sudden shock. Perhaps he can override it. She was already at full gallop, struggling to get another sight on the doctor. She saw him running down the slope towards his machine. "Doctor!" He looked up, flashed her a smile. Sorry, can't stop. People to see, things to... Morvril shot at him, but he dodged. She shot again, gaining on him all the time. He had almost made it when she caught up with him and put the blaster against his head. He struggled. Not this time, Doctor, she said. The door of the space-time machine opened. Take the tablets. Jo's voice was fuzzy, surrounded by a bell-like echoing. Her face seemed huge and at the same time very far away. Sam took the tablets in her hand. They felt tiny and cold. She put them in her mouth, swallowed. Instantly, she began to feel better. Jo's face became normal, human, smiling. Are we there? Jo nodded, gestured at the scanner screen. Outside, the doctor was running down a grassy slope, fire exploding to the left and right of him. Usual situation, said Jo wryly, running for the door. Sam ran after her. Axeman saw the two stranger women running towards the door. He smelled the fire outside, the danger. This wasn't right. They would be hurt. He started after them, pushed them aside as they reached the door. Outside, he saw the rainy season grass and a jumbled creature, half human, half animal. A dream thing, a spirit. Had he entered the world of spirits? Morvril saw the figure emerging from the door, saw the dark, fibrous body armour, and without pausing for thought, turned the blaster on it and fired. It exploded into flames, screaming. No! Bawled the doctor, struggling to get free. Too late, muttered Morvril, watching the charge light of the blaster, waiting for it to be ready for the next shot. Sam saw Axeman's burning body fall, saw Jo with her hand against her mouth, white with shock, saw the doctor outside struggling in the grip of an armoured tractite. Have to act, now. She crouched down, burst out of the door to run, zigzagging wildly. She could see more tractites charging up the slope, one heading for a sleek black object which could only be some kind of field gun. If they get to that, we're finished, she thought. She started through the long grass, ignoring the doctor's shouts, ignoring the thought of Axeman in flames and this is dangerous. The gun getting closer. The gun. She was going to have to do something with the gun because the galloping tractite was almost there, almost on top of her. She dived onto a curved surface, made of a white substance curiously like polystyrene foam, saw a wheel and a large green button in front of her. Wheel for steering, button for... it was obvious enough. She rolled the wheel, saw the barrel of the gun pan towards the galloping tractite. It didn't stop. Sam put her thumb over the button and was going to shout a warning, a threat, the simple word halt. But there was no time to shout, no time to give the alien fair warning. She just had to... fire. The tractite exploded. A leg clattered down on the metal shield between Sam and the barrel of the gun. A solitary leg. There wasn't even any blood, just a seared lump of meat with a piece of charred bone sticking out. The smell of burnt flesh, and the humans are coming, they're coming to kill us all. She heard the doctor's voice. Sam, try not to use... Sam couldn't take her eyes off the leg. The hairs were standing on end, the muscles were still twitching. A tractite spoke. This is Commander Morvril. Whoever you are behind that gun, I've got your spy here. If you value his life, you'll get out from behind the gun now. Don't take any notice, the doctor. Morvril, I can take your people to Tractis in any time you like. But you can't alter the whole universe just to get revenge on... Sam could hear the footsteps approaching. She had to do something now. But all she could do was stare at the dead meat she had just killed. I can't kill anyone. It was her own voice, she realised after a moment. I won't kill anyone. That was better. At least it sounded as if she was making a decision instead of, I have just killed someone. The tractite spoke again. Good. Then come out from behind the gun. She could see two more tractites approaching through the grass. A hand touched her shoulder. She jumped, almost fired the gun by mistake, then saw that it was Jo. You might not want to kill anyone, said Jo quietly, but I want to go home. She aimed the gun at the advancing tractites and pressed the firing button. The ground exploded. The tractites jumped back. Pieces of steaming soil spattered down around them. Gradually, there was silence. "Right," bawled Joe, the shout almost making Sam jump out of her skin. "Everyone into the TARDIS, now, and leave your weapons outside." The silence continued. Sam saw that Morvril was talking into a communicator. The Doctor was underneath her, one huge hoof pinning him to the ground. "Joe!" she began. Joe turned her head, and at that moment the metal shield of the gun blazed with light. Someone had fired at them with a hand weapon. Sam saw Joe's hand hit the firing button, saw the leg of the Tractite she had killed vanish into a ball of fire. In front of them, the Tractite dome crumpled like a building being demolished. Flames shot out of the falling wreckage, and pieces of debris began to tumble through the sky with all the crazy slow motion of a large explosion. Then Joe was turning the gun, and a searing column of fire was moving along the river valley, destroying everything it touched. Sam felt Joe pulling her down behind the gun shield, but all she could look at was the Doctor. The Tractite holding him was balanced on her back legs, her front legs pawing the air, her arms holding the Doctor against her body. A wall of dust and flame hit them, and an instant later slammed Sam against the ground. A few seconds later, she realized that she was alive, unhurt, and the dust was settling. But this time there was no silence, only a ringing in Sam's ears. She scrambled up, ran across the grass towards the Doctor. The grass had been knocked flat and was full of small pieces of smoking wreckage. The big Tractite was lying by the TARDIS, her body still, apart from a few flickers of light from her armour. The Doctor was kneeling beside her, his hand touching her neck. "Oh, Morvril," he said sadly, "you should have changed your mind sooner."